Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving deep into something that's got everyone talking. A Taylor Swift fan's travel troubles on our way to the Eras Tour in Vancouver. We've all had our fair share of travel headaches, right? But this story, um, this story brings up some really interesting questions about passenger rights and airline responsibility. And honestly, just how far we'd go to see your favorite artist. Have you ever gone to extreme lengths to see your favorite artist? Tell us about it down in the comments. So, our Swiftie in question. Her name is Carol Hansson, and she was so excited to be flying from Prince George to Vancouver for three Taylor Swift concerts. What a dream trip, right?
Absolutely a dream trip. But listen, 24 hours before her first show, WestJet canceled her flight because of unplanned aircraft maintenance, which they said was needed for safety. And that's where things get a little complicated.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually reading up on Canada's air passenger protection regulations, and apparently if a flight is canceled for safety reasons, the airline isn't obligated to offer any compensation.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Safety is always the top priority, of course. But this particular clause can sometimes leave passengers in a tough spot, especially when they're facing significant losses, beyond just the cost of the flight itself.
Totally. It really makes you think, what would you do in that situation? Would you just accept the cancellation and miss out on like a once-in-a-lifetime experience?
I want to know. Let us know down in the comments. But Carol, well, she wasn't about to let a canceled flight crush her Swiftie dreams. And that's where this story gets, well, impressive and maybe a little crazy.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right.
Yeah. So instead of just giving up, she found some other fans who were also stranded. They rented a car and drove for 10 hours.
Yeah.
Straight through the night to make it to Vancouver in time for that first concert.
Yeah.
That is dedication.
I know you've got to admire her commitment to the cause, but it also really highlights all those hidden costs that often come with these travel disruptions. Exactly. Carol was out $900 for accommodation she couldn't use. And even splitting the rental car with the other fans still cost her $770. That's a lot of money on top of the original flight.
So WestJet did rebook her on a flight to Vancouver.
Yeah, it was scheduled for 3 days after the concerts. Yeah, they refunded her original flight and baggage fees. But it doesn't seem like a fair solution, considering everything.
Almost like they were saying, sorry you missed the show, but here's your money back for the flight you didn't even take. Okay, so I'm curious, what's the process like for claiming compensation when your flight gets all messed up?
Well, the process can be a little bit different, depending on the airline. And the reason why there was a disruption, generally you need to file a claim with the airline. You have to give them all the details of your booking and explain why you think you should get compensation. But like we saw with Carol's case, there are certain situations where airlines aren't automatically required to compensate you.
So it sounds like navigating all these regulations can be a little bit confusing.
Yeah, it definitely can be.
What are some of the limitations that people should be aware of?
Well, one of the biggest limitations is just the specific wording of the regulations, for example, in this case. Unplanned maintenance for safety. That wording kind of acts as a loophole. It exempts the airline from some of their obligations. Passengers really need to be aware of these little details to understand their rights.
I see your point. Knowledge is power. So even though WestJet wasn't obligated to compensate Carol, do you think they could have done things a little differently?
Well, Carol only asked for $400 in compensation, which seems pretty reasonable to me, considering all of the extra expenses she had to pay because of their cancellation.
For sure. Especially when you think about how hard it is and how expensive it is to even get tickets to a Taylor Swift concert. These aren't just casual events. They're huge cultural moments.
With a lot of meaning for her fans.
Exactly. It's not just about traveling from one place to another. It's about having an experience that has a ton of personal value. So this brings us back to one of the big questions here. Are the air passenger protection regulations, are they really strong enough to protect passengers in these types of situations, especially when people are traveling for these huge once-in-a-lifetime events?
That's the million-dollar question. I mean, these regulations, they were made for all kinds of travel scenarios.
Yeah.
But maybe they need to be updated to keep up with this growing trend of concert and event-based tourism.
Yeah, I think that's a really important conversation, especially as these events get more and more popular. So for those of you watching, if you've been in a similar situation, what strategies have worked for you when dealing with travel disruptions? What would you have done if you were Carol? Share your thoughts down in the comments. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating issue. As fans invest more in these experiences, both financially and emotionally, The stakes just get higher when travel goes wrong.
Yeah, for sure. We're not just talking about missing a flight at this point. We're talking about maybe missing out on memories that people have been looking forward to for months or even years. I'm curious, actually, have any other countries tackled this whole passenger rights issue, especially in relation to these like mega events?
That's a great question. And actually, the European Union has a regulation. It's called EU 261, and it covers flight cancellations and delays.
Oh, interesting.
It doesn't specifically talk about concert goers, but it does offer a more comprehensive framework for compensation, including provisions for misconnections and long delays.
So even if a flight is canceled for reasons outside of the airline's control, like bad weather, passengers might still be entitled to compensation.
That's right. EU 261 takes a broader approach to passenger inconvenience and tries to provide more consistent protection, no matter the reason for the disruption.
That sounds like a model worth exploring. Do you think if Canada adopted something similar, it could help protect passengers like Carol?
It's definitely a possibility. It would take a lot of careful consideration, of course, and a lot of analysis of the potential impact, both on passengers and the airline industry as a whole.
Right.
But it's a conversation worth having. As these huge events continue to draw massive crowds.
I think so too. There seems to be a gap between what's covered by the current regulations and like the reality of how fans travel for these big events. I mean, let's be real. These concerts are planned way in advance. You've got tickets, hotels, time off work. It's a huge investment.
Exactly. The current regulations might address the travel disruption itself,
Right.
but they don't really account for the emotional and financial investment that fans make.
Yeah. And when you think about how complex modern travel is,
Mm.
connecting flights, weather delays, just the sheer volume of people traveling, it seems like the potential for things to go wrong is just increasing all the time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's almost as if the regulations are struggling to catch up. With the changing landscape of travel and entertainment,
So let's dream big for a minute. What would the ideal solution look like? How can we create a system that actually protects passengers, but is also fair to the airlines?
that's the big question, isn't it? And to answer it, I think we need a multifaceted approach.
Okay, let's break that down. What are some key things to consider?
Well, first of all, clarity and transparency are so important. Passengers need to know their rights and what they can expect from airlines in different situations. This could mean simplifying the language of the regulations and making information more accessible online and at airports.
Totally. It shouldn't feel like you need a law degree just to figure out if you can get compensated or not.
I completely agree. Along with that, there needs to be more flexibility. When it comes to offering alternative travel arrangements, just rebooking someone on a flight days after their event isn't really a practical solution. Airlines could maybe explore partnerships with other carriers or even ground transportation options to make sure passengers can still get to their destination in a reasonable amount of time.
So like thinking outside the box of just the usual flight schedules. Could something like a dedicated shuttle service for concert goers be an option?
I love that idea. It really speaks to the need for more creative solutions that recognize the needs of this specific group of travelers.
Absolutely. And what about compensation? Is there a way to strike a better balance between protecting passengers from financial loss while also recognizing that airlines can't control everything?
I think one approach could be to establish clear guidelines for what's considered reasonable compensation in different scenarios. For instance, a fixed amount could be offered for delays over a certain time limit, and then additional compensation could be given for things like missed accommodations or having to pay for alternative transportation.
So finding a system that feels fair and transparent to everyone involved.
Yeah.
What do you think? What changes would you make to the system? Let us know your ideas down in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely chime in. Your experiences and your insights are so valuable in shaping this conversation.
Okay, so we've talked about the need for clear regulations and more flexible solutions. But what about personal responsibility? Do passengers have a role to play in this too when it comes to protecting themselves from travel disruptions?
Absolutely. While regulations and airline practices are crucial, passengers can definitely take steps to minimize the impact of potential problems.
Like what? Give us some pro tips.
Okay, so first of all, travel insurance is your best friend. It can cover you for so many unexpected events like flight cancellations, medical emergencies, lost luggage. It's a small investment that can potentially save you a lot of stress and money.
That's good advice. I think a lot of people forget about travel insurance
Yeah, it's easy to overlook it.
when you're just excited about your trip.
It is. But planning for the unexpected is always a good idea. Another tip is to be flexible with your travel plans. If you can arrive a day or two early, that gives you some buffer time in case of delays or cancellations.
Yeah, that makes sense. So speaking of planning ahead, what are some resources that passengers can use to stay in the loop about their rights and any potential travel issues?
There are some great resources out there. The Canadian Transportation Agency website is a great place to start. They have tons of information on passenger rights and regulations, and they also have a complaint resolution process if you have problems with an airline.
Good to know. What about staying up to date on things like weather events
Yeah.
or airport strikes? That could disrupt travel.
Airline websites and apps are usually pretty good at giving real-time updates on flight status and any potential issues. You can also sign up for email or text alerts.
So it's all about being proactive and staying informed.
Exactly. By taking those steps, passengers can really take control and minimize the risk of those travel nightmare.
It sounds like we can do a lot as individuals to handle these travel situations.
Yeah.
But zooming out a little bit, what about the bigger picture? What role can fans and communities play in advocating for better passenger protection?
Yeah, that's where collective action comes in. Fans are a powerful force, and when they come together, they can really create change.
I love that. So how can we harness that energy to make things better?
Well, sharing stories like Carol's is a good start. It raises awareness and gets people talking about these issues. Online platforms like social media and fan forums are really effective at amplifying these experiences and putting pressure on airlines and regulators.
So it's like using the power of the fandom to hold the decision makers accountable.
Exactly. And beyond online activism, there are other ways to advocate for change. You can contact your elected officials and let them know about your concerns. That can really influence policy.
Okay, so we've got individual actions, online activism,
Yeah.
and contacting our representatives. Any other tips for making our voices heard?
Yeah, definitely. You can support organizations that focus on passenger rights. There are groups dedicated to fairness and transparency in travel, and they rely on public support.
So it's all about working together to make a difference. Okay, so to wrap things up, let's hear from you, our YouTube viewers. We've covered a lot of ground today. Passenger rights, airline responsibilities, travel insurance, even the power of fandom. But if you could change the system, what would you do? What advice would you give to other fans who are dealing with the challenges of travel? Tell us everything down in the comment.
I agree. We want to hear from you.
This has been such an interesting conversation.
Yes.
It's really inspiring to see how passionate fans are.
It is. And remember, your voices matter. And together we can work towards a travel experience that's just as exciting and memorable as the events we're all looking forward to.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of fandom, travel, and passenger protection. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a topic we know you'll be interested in. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep on rocking.